It's Ash from Super Videos, back for another video for The Last of Us on HBO. This is going to be my episode review for the premiere episode, Season 1, Episode 1, which was called When You're Lost in the Darkness. Stay tuned, we'll be right back with this review. Alright, as always, before we dive into it, smash the like button, subscribe to join our community, and press the bell to be notified when I upload on the channel. With that said, let's dive right into it. Now, one thing I want to say right off the bat is, as a video game fan, I thought that this was a solid episode, but it definitely had its flaws, which I'll go through. Now, as a non-video game player, if you watched this, you would probably give it 100% score. And I feel like as a non-game player, the story that we saw in the premiere episode of the TV adaptation will definitely be powerful and you'll definitely enjoy the heck out of it. Now, as a video game fan, there were parts that I feel were done better in the game than the TV adaptation. So let's go through it. I mean, we can really break this episode down into two parts. One part with the setup of the cordyceps fungus spreading and the pandemic of the cordyceps fungus, and the other part with the 20-year time jump and the quarantine zone chapter of the video game. Now, I think even as a video game player, they did the setup way better in the TV version than the game. I mean, the game was great, but the TV adaptation was even better because it filled in the gaps. Starting off with that intro, we went back to 1968, where we had the scientists talk about the things that pose a threat to humanity, and of course the cordyceps fungus was one of the discussions that they had. Even though they didn't mention it by name, they did talk about fungi being one of the key ingredients of a disaster, mixed in obviously with warm climates and stuff like that, which the scientists obviously went into detail. I absolutely loved this setup and this intro. Now, I think looking at just this episode alone, it felt like it was flat. Like it felt like it didn't really connect to anything, even though it obviously sets up the pandemic or the outbreak of the fungi, which we see later on. But I feel like there's something missing, and that something has to do with what happened, like how did it all come together? Now you may be wondering why I'm even bringing that up. They need it because it's better setup. I mean, this by itself is great, but it feels like it's missing something. And I feel like by adding that, it would do a lot more in expanding the story and to give us a better experience. And I'm not even mad at it that they didn't put it in this episode, because I know for a fact that the next episode will include it. And the origin story of the cordyceps will actually connect to a story that we're going to see in Jakarta, Indonesia. And for those of you that don't know, we cover a lot of the behind the scenes stuff for the show before it came out. And that was something that was uncovered as part of what we've been talking about for the last few months. There was even teases at it in one of the teasers that they released for the show. Now, in the show itself, Sarah actually brings up Jakarta as well. So I think that that's definitely an early hint that we're definitely gonna get that Indonesia, Jakarta origin story in the TV adaptation, which is awesome. Now with that, let's talk a little bit about the title card or the intro card. I absolutely love it. I mean, it's definitely gonna become an iconic intro card for HBO. And it's definitely similar to the same type of intro that we saw in the video game, but it's colorized and it has an even greater punch to it with the visuals and everything. And I absolutely love one part where the fungi grow and it looks like it's skyscrapers. I didn't include the screen cap, but that was also great because it symbolizes how the fungus or the cordyceps are taking over the world and how they're an essential aspect of any skyline that you see in this new post-apocalyptic world. But also at the end of the intro, I absolutely love the silhouette of Joel and Ellie on there, so I thought that was a great touch as well. And then we get into the time jump from 1968 to 2003. Now, as far as the prologue or the setup part of the story in the premiere, we're obviously spending a lot more time specifically with Sarah in the TV adaptation than the video game, which I absolutely loved. I mean, that was one of the better things about the differences in the premiere episode. And the reason why is because we are connecting more to the character, Sarah. We had that a little bit in the video game, but not as much. We had very little time to be invested in the character. But in the TV adaptation, I absolutely love that they're making that a lot easier because they're actually giving us some more in terms of the background of Sarah and also the family relationship between Sarah, Joel, and Tommy. Now, as far as the actress and the actors, I think Sarah was fine. I know a lot of people had a problem with the casting, but I thought that she was fine. I thought that she played the character very well. Tommy was great. I mean, I couldn't even tell a difference at times when I was looking at him. So to me, that was Tommy from the game. Joel also, I feel like Pedro Pascal killed it as Joel, just like Gabriel Luna as Tommy, and just like Nico Parker as Sarah. So I thought that everyone was great, and I didn't find any problems with the acting or the performance. Now, as far as the watch, which is definitely an essential part of who Joel is, it's not just a watch in terms of Joel's story. It means something. It's something significant. Now, in the TV version, they changed things slightly and had Sarah actually pay to fix Joel's watch, when in the game, she actually paid to buy him a new watch. So it was more impactful, in my opinion, in the TV adaptation. The story was still there, and it still had its punch, but it was a greater impact in the video game, I feel. Some of you may disagree with me on that. But as far as the whole conversation between Joel and Sarah with the watch, I absolutely loved it. It was almost shot by shot, dialogue by dialogue, matching the game. And I absolutely loved that they kept that, because that was one of the positive parts of the prologue and something that the prologue is really known for. One of the things, obviously, not the main thing, but one of the things. The next thing I want to talk about is I did really love the Curtis and Viper 2 Easter egg, and I feel like this is going to be an even more important aspect of the story later on. I have a separate video on that, so you can check it out if you're interested. Now, as far as the whole setup of Sarah waking up and kind of not seeing Joel there and alerts on the news and everything, I think that was great. I mean, they did a great job matching this to the game, because it looks like the game itself. Like, the whole house looks like the house from the game. So I absolutely loved it. Now, one thing that they changed is, instead of having the neighbor attack Joel and Sarah at their house, they changed things slightly, where they have Sarah go to the neighbor's house and then witness the horror and seeing the old lady as an infected person. I absolutely loved all of that. One minor flaw, I don't like the tendrils that we see in their mouths. I mean, it just doesn't fit. It looks alien to the show. I know that they're replacing that with the spores. Like, they're not going to have spores, they're going to have these tendrils in the mouth, and that's how the virus is going to spread. But I think that the game version was a lot better, but at the same time, maybe it's not because it's a bad thing. Maybe it's because I'm used to something else, and maybe I just need to wait, and maybe it'll grow on me. But from what I saw, it looked a little silly because it didn't fit the universe necessarily. With that said, I loved the whole thing. I'm not saying that I didn't love it. I'm just saying that that one minor thing threw me back a little bit. But with that said, the other thing I did want to say is, even though they had the scene play out differently, where the neighbor doesn't actually attack Joel and Sarah at their house, I loved what they did. And this was another very positive aspect of what they changed about the TV adaptation. One minor thing that I feel they could have done is also have that scene with the neighbor at the house, because that scene had a different type of horror to it. With the neighbor trying to break through the glass door, I feel like that was another type of horror that you don't necessarily get with the way that they did it. Maybe I would have loved to see a combination of both of these two things together. As far as Tommy, Joel, and Sarah riding out of town, I thought that was all great. I mean, it was definitely matching almost 100% to what we saw in the video game. And I absolutely loved all of it. They kept everything that I feel they should have kept. And they changed things that I think they should have changed. They didn't change too much as far as that aspect, like the three of them riding out of the town. But they did slightly change some of the dialogue, which I thought was good as well. One thing that they definitely changed was how the crash happens. In the TV version, there's a plane crash that knocks them out. But in the video game, it was a car crash. I love this change. I think this was a pretty solid, positive change that they made. And I absolutely loved it. When it comes to the scene with Sarah's death, it was powerful. It was devastating. It did what it needed to do. And I absolutely loved it. I mean, the impact was obviously greater in the video game because it was the first time we were witnessing it. So that obviously took away from it a little bit, but it still served the purpose that it needed to serve, and I absolutely loved it. As far as the performance, it was great. I mean, it was almost identical to the game, and I feel like it was definitely devastating. If a non-gamer watches this scene, they're gonna be bawling their eye out. But then we get into the 20 years later time jump. Something that they added in for the TV adaptation is having the girl show up to the quarantine zone in Boston. I think that that was a nice touch that they added. And I feel like the fate that that girl goes through and the way that Joel has to throw her into the fire pit was definitely a nice touch because it just shows you that Joel doesn't have any connections to anyone anymore. It's like he doesn't have a soul anymore. He's lost the power of love in him in a way. But obviously with Ellie's introduction, it's all going to come back to him and we're going to see a huge shift in who he is. So I absolutely love that they added that in the story. When it comes to the other part of the quarantine zone story, obviously the part with Robert, I thought that the game did it a lot better. Obviously in the TV adaptation, we actually see Tess dealing with Robert at the beginning. Now I absolutely loved the actress Anna Torv and I loved how badass she was. It was all great. But at the same time, the only negative thing I have to say about this is that with the way that everything turned out, we didn't actually get the back and forth and the exchange between Robert and Joel and Tess. So this episode wasn't as action-packed as it could have been if they followed the game. And I feel like as great as it was, the game version was a lot better because we had that great back and forth and that great action early on in the story. Now, when it comes to Ellie being in that room, being interrogated by fireflies, I thought that was great. I mean, Bella Ramsey as Ellie, she killed it. I didn't see any point in the story or any point in the episode, I should say, where I thought to myself, this wasn't a good Ellie. I know a lot of people still feel like she's not a good Ellie, but I loved it. I mean, she has an Ellie-ness to her. You know what I mean? Like, she has the charisma, she has the sense of humor, she has the potty mouth, so she's great. Now, as far as what we saw in that particular scene with the fireflies, obviously that's brand new to the TV show, and I think that was good. I didn't have a problem with this scene. I think that it was good because it fleshed out the backstory a little bit more. As far as Joel and Tess, I absolutely loved that they actually gave us a bit more in terms of their relationship because they didn't do that in the game. Now I'm hoping that we see a bit more, some more concrete reveals about them, but this was good for the start. Now as far as Marlene, I absolutely loved Marlene's introduction. She's definitely got an attitude, more so in the TV adaptation than the video game. But I absolutely loved Marlene and what we saw in this particular scene with her dealing with the people that are reporting to her. There was one little scene that we saw with Joel and this one Firefly guy who comes to talk to him. I thought that was great. Joel says, if you tell me to look for the light, I'll break your jaw or something like that. I thought that was a pretty cool scene. But when it comes to the conversation between Marlene and Ellie, I think it was great. I mean, one problem that I had is Ellie didn't know Marlene in the TV version, but that was not as realistic. Like, they could have played that a bit differently, because in the game, obviously she knew Marlene. She just didn't hang out with her or anything, but they knew of each other. So the fact that Ellie didn't know anything about Marlene was a little bit of a WTF moment for me. But the other part of the story where we have Tess and Joel sneaking into the tunnels, I absolutely loved it. That clicker on the wall, it looks amazing. I can't say anything else about it. Just looks super cool. It's like we're in the game. I loved it. Like I said earlier, Robert's death was not done great in the show, even though in the game even it wasn't a big deal, but I think that we needed that bit of action early on that we had in the game, but we didn't really see that. So that was definitely not as great. But I absolutely loved this exchange between Joel and Ellie, the way that Joel almost knocks her out, something that they obviously didn't do in the game. So I thought that was great. But this scene also where we have Joel and Ellie in that room with Ellie saying, "What are you doing?" and Joel saying, "Killing time." I absolutely love that. Another thing that I'm glad they added or they kept, because in the game it was sort of a iconic scene on its own, and it was definitely a cool moment. One thing that I didn't like was how they brought the watch up, because in the game, the reason why Ellie even brings up the watch being broken was because they were just going back and forth and making fun of each other, and it was sort of a bonding moment. But in the TV show, they didn't do it like that, and it felt like a random thing for her to say, and it came out of the blue. So they could have expanded on that a little bit, and it could have been a bit more powerful. But then we get to the scene that I absolutely hated in this episode. We get to the scene where the soldier actually sees Joel, Ellie, and Tess trying to sneak out. Now, one thing I want to say right away is that they shrunk that whole outskirts story of the game. Like, we didn't see them trying to avoid the lights, the searchlights, and we didn't see them crawling and kind of sneaking around or anything like that. So I think that this could have been a lot better getting to this point. Like, it felt like this was right around the corner where the quarantine zone was. But in the game, you kind of had to travel a little bit before you got there. Now, the other thing that I didn't really like was the reveal about Ellie's condition here. But one thing I did love, though, is how this scene with Joel protecting Ellie paralleled the scene with Joel and his daughter Sarah. I absolutely loved that. And I feel like there was something very powerful about this whole thing, like this particular moment. I do talk a lot more about that on a separate video. If you're interested, go check it out. But the way that the reveal about Ellie's condition came, I feel like it was rushed. Like, there was a bit more setup in the game. There was a bit more build-up, but we didn't really have any build-up. They just went right for it in the TV version. So they skipped through a little bit of dialogue, which I feel they could have kept. And I feel like this part was a little rushed, but I absolutely loved the ending of this episode. Now, the visuals is phenomenal. I can't say enough good things about it. And the other thing that I absolutely love in the TV adaptation, you kind of have two stories right now. The story with Joel trying to find Tommy because he might be in trouble, and also the story with Joel and Tess just doing a job, trying to get Ellie to where the Fireflies need her. So I feel like these two aspects of the story are definitely great setups at the end of the premiere episode. But that's pretty much it for my review. I will have to give it a solid 8.5 out of 10. I think that it was a pretty solid episode, but there were a few things that they could have changed to make the episode even better and to have it be more powerful. But with that said, I'm definitely intrigued to know your thoughts and opinions. Share your thoughts and opinions in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this, smash the like button, subscribe to join our community, and press the bell to be notified when I upload on the channel. That's it for this video. See you next time for another super video.